For people looking to burn fat, stop disease, and feel healthy again, but are at the beginning of their journey, what are the 3 superfoods they need to add into their diet to start seeing some great results?
Great question. And, if you had asked me that question as little as 5 years ago, I think I might have had a very different answer than I have today, because we've made some really remarkable progress in understanding what fat burning means. The term thermogenics is applied to that, fat burning. And what is fat burning? So the question now would really be, what is it that can activate your silent fat called beige fat to become brown fat? Now, what's that all about? Beige fat is a kind of a series of fat cells that sit in your fat mass, particularly your visceral fat, your around the abdomen fat, which, if it's not properly stimulated, it just sits there and stores energy, and you don't have much positive benefit other than gaining weight. But it's been found, and this is a recent discovery, that beige fat, those cells, they're called beige adipocytes, those can be activated to become brown adipocytes. Now, what's the advantage of brown adipocytes? Brown adipocytes, when they're woken up from beige adipocytes, now metabolize calories very, very rapidly. They produce body heat, and therefore they become centers for conversion of fat to energy and getting rid of extra energy that you don't need to store. So then it begs the question, well, what have we learned about how to activate the process of the conversion of beige into brown fat cells that'll do that work for you? And it started off recognizing that these were cells that were activated by body's hormones, noradrenaline being one part of the family of hormones that are related to the stress response. And so they found that certain kinds of stresses, particularly cold immersion and non-shivering cold, would actually induce the conversion of beige fat to brown fat. So that was some of the first studies that really said, hey, we might be able to do stuff to actually activate our ability to burn our own fat rather than store it for a rainy day that never comes. And so that led into the birthing of cold immersion and looking at people in northern climates versus southern climates and so forth and so on. Then the next level, where people started in exercise physiology, started to say, well, hold it, can we influence then the conversion of this beige fat that's sitting there dormant into this active brown fat if we put a person into a certain kind of exercise program? And the answer is yeah. It turned out that aerobic exercise, particularly kind of endurance-related exercises, could have a very favorable effect on enhancing the conversion of these beige fat cells into brown cells and then burning energy. So that was number 2. Then number 3, people said, well, hold it, what is the process at the biological level that cold and or exercise is making this beige fat become brown fat? And they found that it was processes that were occurring within the energy powerhouse of cells called the mitochondrion. And these are the furnaces that reside within our cells that actually burn energy. They burn sugar, they burn fats, and that then creates the energy of our activity. So-called ATP is one of the currencies that our mitochondria produce. And so people then said, well, are there things that would activate ATP production or energy production in the mitochondria through nutrients that we eat? And that led then into inspection of different types of diets. And so we found that diets that were kind of fasting mimicking diets, diets that would restrict calories for a while, would activate the beige to the brown fat. So we got into this whole thing about, is fasting good? And will fasting be a way that, so you take away certain nutrients? And the answer is, to extent, yes, there is some advantage to kind of cyclicking exposure to food and non-food. And it led to this whole fasting mimicking diet approach. And then it led to time-restricted eating, where people said, now hold it, if I just stopped eating, say at 6 o'clock at night, and I didn't eat again until 8, 9, or 10 in the morning, would that have a beneficial effect on converting the beige fat to the brown fat? And the answer is yes. That's another tool that one can use, is this time-restricted feeding. Then they said, well, but are there nutrients in the diet that actually influence that? So then the question is, Are higher protein diets beneficial? Are higher certain kinds of fats like omega-3 oils, are they beneficial? And it was found that yes, that omega-3 oils actually have a beneficial effect on mitochondrial bioenergetics in the ability to activate the conversion of beige to brown fat. So people started saying, well, I want to make sure I get the right ratio of omega-3 oils in my diet. And that kind of led into this revolution that we're hearing right now about seed oils, because seed oils, as you know, are very high in omega-6. That's like corn oil, safflower oil, sunflower seed oil, soy oil. That's very high in a fat called linoleic acid, which is an omega-6 oil. And it is very, very low. In fact, it's pretty much devoid of any of these omega-3 oils, the ones that have been found to help improve the conversion of beige to brown fat. So then people started saying, well, let's make sure we get enough omega-3s in our diet, and let's cut out the amount of seed oils that we're eating, because those are so rich in this linoleic acid, and that is counterpoint to what we're trying to achieve to increase our energetics. So that's another dietary approach. And then let's make sure that our blood sugar is not wandering all over the landscape, because blood sugar effects can also influence the conversion of our beige to our brown fat. So we ought to be eating diets that are low in glycemic load, meaning they don't stimulate the output of insulin, and glucose in our blood, sugar in our blood, doesn't go up and down like the Himalayan mountains. And so that means eating diets that basically have a lot of unprocessed and high fiber, soluble and insoluble fiber, diets that we find in the blue zones of the world, people that live long lives and with good health. Those diets, which are very low in sugar, very low in processed carbs, much higher than in rich sources of nutrients, particularly vegetables that are have color. So we talk about eating the rainbow, because if you eat the rainbow from natural foods, you're going to get a lot more of these nutrients that are identified to help convert the beige to the brown fat. So then people said, well, hold on, what makes those foods colored? Are there things in there that you could eat that would other than just eating blueberries and eating asparagus and spinach and cauliflower and broccoli and carrots, are there nutrients in there that actually are responsible for the conversion of the beige to the brown fat? And it turns out that one of the family of nutrients that has been found to do that are called the flavonoids, or the polyphenols. And the polyphenols, things like quercetin, luteolin, rutin, there's literally thousands of these different plant substances found in whole, minimally processed fruits and vegetables. That these specific substances, one of which has gotten a lot of familiarity in people because it's kind of a darling, called resveratrol. Resveratrol is one of these polyphenols, and it's found in grapes and red wine and peanut skins, Spanish peanut skins, and it is a metabolic activator of this conversion of beige to brown fat. Then we started looking at other nutrients like coenzyme Q10, what foods are high in coenzyme Q10? Well, people have said, well, organ meats are high in Q10. So maybe we should include more organ meats in our diet. So we start to develop this kind of understanding that the dietary approach that really encourages our body's ability to burn fat and rather than store it by this inborn ability to convert beige fat into brown fat is dependent on eating a diet that's low in sugar, low in processed fats, higher in fiber, very rich in these polyphenols, which are coming from, as I said, eating the rainbow, fruits and vegetables of color, everything from orange to blue, and making sure you get some regular exercise, you expose yourself to some cold, you get out of the routine of eating 3 square meals all day and night, and you use this time restricted feeding, and you also recognize that reduction of well, let's put it the other way. Positive impact on sleep quality and duration also influences your beige to brown fat conversion. So all those become part of a recipe that, when applied, can actually lead to your body's doing what it wants to do, and that's not store unnecessary calories for rainy days that never come.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing so in depth regarding my question. I would love to kind of simplify what you just shared for the audience. So, if somebody's just getting started on this journey and you were able to craft an ideal nutrition or diet plan for them, like what specific types of foods, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, would you say they should incorporate to get some easy wins?
Okay, so I think first of all, I believe starting with a smoothie for breakfast that has a combination of quality protein that is rich in. I particularly like yogurt or fermented dairy, but it could be other kinds of cultured products because the gut microbiome is a very important part of this process of your brown fat doing what it needs to do and your gut being friendly to you. So I think putting yogurt that would be non-sugar, high quality yogurt into your smoothie is a good idea. We've also found, and this is one of the things that it's kind of a secret that is a 3,500-year-old secret, but we're just really learning it. There's a food that's called tartary buckwheat that we've been exploring quite a bit. That is a really kind of a remarkable contributor of the nutrients that are necessary for activating a brown fat and actually has a favorable effect on GLP-1, so it helps to stimulate proper insulin sensitivity. And when you sprout tartary buckwheat into tartary buckwheat sprout powder and put that into a smoothie, you get a huge boost in its ability to facilitate thermogenics and the conversion of beige to brown fat. And previously, that particular food was just not available in the United States. And it was kind of one of my disappointments when I learned about it, having traveled in Asia quite a bit, that we didn't have access to it. So it now is available. We've spent quite a bit of time the last 5 years actually becoming the first people to farm Himalayan tartary buckwheat in the United States. It's a domestically grown crop now in our organic certified regenerative farms in upstate New York. And then we have developed a proprietary sprouting process where we convert those seeds into sprouts and make a powder, which a couple of teaspoons of that go into my smoothie every morning. And it is an amazing powerhouse food as it relates to the activating of this process. You would put that together then with the berries, particularly the dark purple and blue berries. They have these very high levels of what are called anthocyanins that are a form of polyphenols that are known again to facilitate the activation of the beige to the brown fat. So now we've got kind of a start of a recipe for the day. Then we move from that to lunch, and lunch here for me is organic chicken, fish, or terrestrial animals if you're so inclined. And again, the reason I suggest organic is because you get away from the chemical legacy of the feedlot-fed animals. It kind of undermines what we're trying to do as it relates to activation of the beige to the brown fat. So something like 3 to 5 ounces of some kind of meat. I particularly like salmon myself. I'm in the Pacific Northwest. The salmon is kind of our legacy food up here, and it's very high in omega-3 fatty acids, which I mentioned to you is very desirable for helping to improve your fat burning capability. So again, and I would say connect that together with herbal tea. When I think the best tea could be hot or cold is green tea. It's very high in a polyphenol called epigallocatechin gallate or ECGC that is again an activator of your brown fat. So there's your lunch, and then at dinner. Again, I think making sure you get your dinner completed before, say, 6 to 7 o'clock, so you have a nice period between that and the next day for your time restricted eating. And so dinner again is staying away from anything that would relate to altering your blood sugar. So I'm not against gluten-free seed products. Again, we use tartary buckwheat flour, we use quinoa flour, we use common buckwheat flour, those kinds of vegetable protein, cereal-based flours that are free of gluten. Again, can form a very I think, a very positive impact upon blood sugar because of their high fiber content and their ability to blunt blood sugar elevations. So again, there are whole recipes that one can apply utilizing those kinds of foods that give you some boost in the evening and sustain your body's energy producing overnight. And then I wouldn't forget the very powerful importance of what are called the cruciferous vegetables. So I would make sure I get those some form of those in my diet each day. That would be cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts. Uh, let's see, what am I missing there? Um, I think though I said broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. Yeah, those are the principal members of the cruciferous vegetable family. And the reason those are good to include is that they're very high in a family of nutrients called glucosinolates that again help to activate this process of conversion of fat to energy. So I think those are some tips as to how one would construct a diet with specific foods that would help support this process.
Obviously, there's been a lot of talk over the last couple of years, and again, controversy with some of these foods that, things like seed oils, carbs, alcohol, which I think everybody agrees is bad for you, um, sugar, etc.
By the way, I don't agree that alcohol is bad for you. It's all around moderation. It's all around amount. People don't recognize it, but if you are a teetotaler, let's assume that you never consume an alcoholic beverage, your body still is exposed to alcohol because in your intestinal tract you have organisms that are fermenting your carbohydrate in your diet into alcohol. So there is no such thing as a person that's not exposed to alcohol. It has to do with the amount. And so I'm not against prudent use of alcohol in wine or beer. Beer also, if it's a well crafted beer, contains hop derived materials they're called isohumulones, and isohumulones also activate the conversion of brown fat beige fat to brown fat. So I'm not a stickler about eliminating all forms of alcohol.
Yeah, my point was essentially like there's been like just controversy and a lot of debate on these topics over the last few years. Like, is it really that bad? Is it good? Like the whole red wine conversation. I mean, I think that has been debunked where you need to drink like a liter of wine in a sitting, I think, to get the amount of resveratrol that actually provides any kind of benefit. And I agree with what you're saying. It's like people, yeah, if people can tolerate, it in a certain amount that's not going to impact their health or any kind of legal stuff, then by all means. I just think the problem becomes where, um, I think if people are radically trying to transform their health, I think they have to be mindful of some of these other habits. But with that said, are there any other foods that are promoted as healthy or foods in general that you think people should absolutely stay away from that might not be as obvious?
Well, I think that's a really, I don't want to make it more complicated than it needs to be, but a lot of that has to do with how the food was processed. Because uh, let's use just a gross example. If you were to eat olives off the tree, you would get sick because olives unprocessed off a tree contain chemicals that can actually create liver toxicity. So people learned centuries ago, millennia ago, how to take olives off the tree and to treat them so they become free of those toxic substances so that you eat them. So I think that the construct of foods that would be absolutely no really comes to the question of how are those foods in nature treated and how did you ultimately get them into your diet? Let me use an example. Um, it is very clear now that heavily processed meats have serious health adverse effects if they're overly consumed. Does that mean the meat that's in those processed meats are producing the same adverse effect? No. Actually, those might be quite helpful in their natural unprocessed form. But you convert them into something where you add a bunch of chemicals, nitrates, and flavor enhancers, and a lot of other stuff. And now you suddenly have a different kind of food that may have been made out of the beef or pork or chicken or lamb, but now it's having a very different effect on your body. So I think to me, the processing of foods from their natural state into the way they ultimately end up in our mouth is really important. Let me use another example. I think most of us all love barbecue. Barbecue is fun. It's good. It's tasty. I'm kind of a semi aficionado of barbecue, but you have to be careful about how you barbecue, because if you start flame searing everything to the extent that you're producing a lot of injury to the protein due to the flames in your barbecue, now you produce a secondary set of chemicals in those foods that are actually toxic and carcinogenic. And so you actually end up producing a food that's not as good for you as it was when you started. So similarly, that in Asia they learned how to cook with high temperature in woks, because woks only expose food for a short period of time to higher temperature, and so it can decontaminate bacteria that might be growing on the food, but it doesn't injure the food so that it produces something that could be dangerous. And people learned this thousands of years ago. So my to make that question a little bit more complicated, uh, I would not touch anything that's overly processed with a bunch of things in it that we don't know, unless you're a chemist, what they really mean.
And as far as like people who are looking to burn body fat, what other habits do you think are important to put in place um, from a wellness standpoint? We will get you back to this episode of the Adversity Advantage in just 1 second, but first, I want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Timeline Nutrition. Some of my main priorities right now are optimizing my health, wellness, and longevity. And as many of you know, I've been a fan of Timeline Nutrition and MitoPure for a really long time, especially these new longevity gummies. And right now, Timeline has a special offer that you can get 20% off your first Timeline purchase. And there's never been a better time to experience the benefits of MitoPure. And if you use my code Doug at checkout, you will receive 20% off today. If you've been thinking about trying Timeline, this is your sign. Once again, they're offering my audience a 20% discount on all first-time purchases. So use code Doug at checkout to get 20% off, or go to timeline.com/Doug to get 20% off. Again, timeline.com/Doug to get 20% off your first purchase of MitoPure and Timeline Nutrition. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I think that when I look back now over my 79 years, which is hard to even for me to reflect that I've been on this planet 79 years. It's just a kind of, how did it all go so quickly? But when I think about it, my body weight today is within 5 pounds what it was when I was in college. And that's quite a few years ago, to say the least. And so, how did that happen? Did it happen because I was given just the gift of maintenance of body weight, or did I do something over those 70 some years that resulted in that outcome? And I believe that it's as people have studied the genetics of obesity, they recognize that there is no gene that codes for obesity. There are genes that one have that might determine how your body responds to your eating habits that could result in obesity, but we can't say a gene causes you to be fat. So therefore, if you really talk about how to maintain um, body mass, or your body weight, your body composition is actually better, the percentage of body muscle versus body fat over a long period of time. It has to do with putting together a whole series of things that become part of your daily routine. It's not just going on a diet periodically. And that, as we said, is regular activity. This thing about 10,000 steps is very interesting. If you do look at the data on people who regularly walk and do, travel something on the order between 5,000 and 10,000 steps a day, versus people that are more sedentary, that just sit at desks all day long and are transported by mechanical devices and don't walk. The difference in their weight over life, but between those two groups, is quite substantial. With the group that, as you'd expect, that's very sedentary, having much higher issues of body mass than individuals who walk daily, 5 to 10,000 steps a day. And you might say, well, when you're walking, does that mean you're not eating? Is that why you're cutting calories down? No, the people can actually be consuming about the same calories, sometimes even greater number of calories, but they're tuning their body up to use those calories for energy, like I talked about, the conversion of beige to brown fat. So there's a life choice as to how you're going to use your time. I've often said that if you could use 4% of your time each day having some activity of motion, 4%, that would be about an hour a day. So if you had an hour a day accumulative where you were not sitting and not sleeping, where you were walking and moving by whatever mechanism, it could be um, more drilling exercises and pattern coached exercises or competitive exercises, or it could be as simple as setting out 2 walks a day after your lunch and dinner. You go for a 20-minute walk both times and you compile 40 minutes of activity. Those things over the course of living have huge impacts upon maintenance of proper body weight, and also, by the way, building body muscle. So now we talk about how do you actually get rid of fat and replace it with muscle, because muscle is the energy unit of our body. It's what's using up most of our energy is our muscle. And so that then has to do with making sure you get quality protein that is rich in the essential amino acids. There are 8 essential amino acids that the body can't make. It has to get it from food. And in general, the high quality proteins, like albumin from dairy products, or beef protein and fish protein. All of these are very high in these essential amino acids, particularly what are called the branched chain amino acids, or BCAAs, that help to support proper muscle mass and have an anabolic effect, meaning they tend to build tissue, build muscle tissue. So you want to make sure you're getting something like between 1.5 and 2 grams of dietary protein per kilogram of your body weight a day. So what that translates to is something like 2 meals a day where you have reasonably good protein, or start your morning with a high protein shake and then have another meal during the day with that's rich in with protein that's high in essential essential amino acids. That's another very important guidepost for maintenance of your body weight and in building muscle, because muscle then uses energy and doesn't store it for a rainy day like fat does. Then third, and one that I think a lot of people probably discount as its importance in maintaining body weight, is stress. Stress hormones are hormones that can cause you to gain weight. The glucocorticoids, as they're called, these are the hormones that your adrenal glands produce. And one of those has the name cortisol. And cortisol is a storage hormone that actually encourages your body to make fats and store fats, and convert sugar into fats through a process of metabolism. So stress is not our friend as it relates to regular weight management. And so that then gets into the question of, okay, what do you do if your life is complicated, which most of our lives are, and you have things that don't always go as planned, and so you have these stressful events? What do you do? And I think what you do is you need to find each day this safe harbor where you can reground, reset yourself. That's why I think this, as I mentioned earlier, something like a walking or exercise program is more than just the activity itself. It's also a chance to reset. It's a chance to get your energy recalibrated. It's a chance to get rid of unnecessary thoughts that are creating stress that then create the hormones that cause weight gain. And I think that we've all seen this in our lives, maybe even had our own experience that when we've been under stressful periods that we tend to gain weight. We could lose weight too. People can be into a hypermetabolic state, but over longer periods of time, chronic stress generally leads to weight gain. So I think that the combination of exercise, stress reduction, enjoying things that you love to do, listening to music, hanging out with friends, getting away from toxic exposures that activate your stress response, all of those become part of a proper weight and body composition management program. And then that ties lastly to sleep, because we know that when sleep is interrupted, when you have imbalance, what's called circadian rhythms, that then influences the clocks that are within every cell of your body to alter its metabolism. And now you get into a state, again, I guess it's similar to what we would say with stress. It's a form of stress response that also encourages weight gain. You have hormones like melatonin, that's the sleep hormone produced by the pineal gland in the brain that's altered. And all of these things then influence your metabolism in such a way that you tend to store rather than utilize your calories of energy. So, sleep hygiene, sleep regularity, coupled with proper exercise, stress management, the diet I talked about, the nutrients that activate beige to brown fat. So, when I look back over my 79 years and say, so did I intentionally set out to be able to maintain my body weight since college? And the answer is no. I just tried to introduce those principles that I've been describing in a routine way to become patterns of part of my life. I've traveled over 6 million miles, so I know that I can do it even with traveling. Yeah, I know that number is crazy, isn't it? 6 million miles. How many people would ever elect to want to travel 6 million miles in their life? I didn't elect to have it done. It just kind of happened over my years in this field. But the way that I've been able to manage through that is again by introducing these concepts I'm mentioning in a regular daily routine over years and years, and that's the outcome.
And when it comes to like longevity, like, before we recorded, I was like, man, you're 79, like, way to go. Like, you can't really tell, at least in my eyes. You talked about the blue zones at the beginning. We've talked about, how to lose body fat, how to reduce stress. All these things are so important for longevity. What are some of the other principles you think people should abide by if they're trying to optimize longevity and quality of life as they age?
This is the individual's search for the elixir of youth. All of us are in search for it. And as we know, there's a tremendous amount of research that's now ongoing as it relates to this concept of life extension, longevity, anti-aging, and many things have been propounded as being extraordinarily useful, only to be found later that maybe they were exaggerated. I'm thinking of human growth hormone given to older age people. At first, it was thought it was going to be the magic way to be youthful, but then it turned out in time that when people did this, they ended up with other problems like diabetes and liver problems. And so, the solution, I think, to longevity is a meaningful life. It's a life with purpose. It's a life with love. It's a life with other people. It's a life of association. It's leading the principles that Dan Buettner talks about in his book Blue Zones, that has 11 different characteristics that are associated not only with eating but living and being on this planet in a purposeful way, having some spiritual belief system, being connected, having friends that you can have honest conversations with, having loving relationships, being feeling that the planet is a gift that you are given to enjoy, and being respectful of it, and then eating with grace and eating the kind of foods that don't just support the food economic system, but food that support your long-term health and enjoyment. And I think that when we distill down all the research that's been done, and there's a lot that's been done recently on biological aging, what we start to learn is that the lessons from the past become the guides for the future. So it's almost like Back to the Future. We're doing it maybe in a little more scientific way now, but the principles of good living have been around for centuries and are the best scientific studies that we have in looking back at how people have proceeded in terms of their longevity. The What's going on right now with senolytics. Senolytics are the word senescence means aging, and senolytics are substances that you can take to break the aging process. And there is a lot of research going on around senolytics right now. And there is a very interesting combination of two substances that have been found to, at least in animals, to extend longevity reproducibly in these animal studies. I want to emphasize these are not human studies yet, but they're animal studies. And the two substances, one is called denosumab, it's a drug, and the other is called quercetin, which is a bioflavonoid from the diet. Those two substances, when given together to animals, have been found to actually extend longevity quite remarkably. And the mechanism by which that does at the cellular level has been exhaustively studied by really high level investigators at Mayo and Harvard and elsewhere. And it is now starting to have us understand the mechanism of biological aging. Now, most people at this point would not probably elect to take a cancer drug, denosumab. They might take more quercetin in their diet or other flavonoids. We also recognize that there's an interesting substance that was found in the mold in Rapa Nui in the Easter Islands that has an anti-aging effect because of its influence also on this same biological process that I'm talking about, the senolytic process. So there are substances that are now being discovered, and there are development of new ways of approaching the biological aging process that may deliver extension of our life expectancy. Um, what I can say with a surety now, today, is the evidence that we have from looking historically at cultures that have lived 100 years healthily, in a very common, is that those tools are already available for us to use today without the development of new medicines, if we just live the kind of things that are associated with the populations that live in these blue zones. And by the way, one of the blue zones, which I think is very telling, is Loma Linda, California. Now, Loma Linda is right in the middle of LA County, and the people that live in Loma Linda have 6 to 9 years longer life expectancy on average than people who live across the the block over out of Loma Linda. So they drink the same water, they breathe the same air. What's going on? Are these people in Loma Linda different genetics? No, they are a whole different sets of genetics. They're a mixture of different genetic types of people. But what they are is they're Seventh Day Adventist. And so they eat these diets that are associated with people who live in the blue zones, the diets that are much high in the rainbow colored foods that I talked about, rich in these polyphenols and these flavonoids, the things that I talked about with Himalayan tartary buckwheat that have been associated for centuries with long life and good health, long health spans. So I think that there is where our real answer lies today. That's what we should be doing if we want to have a century of good living and compress our illness into maybe just a couple of minutes before we move on. And I think that there is a lot to be learned by using intelligence into how we design our lifestyle.
Speaking of lifestyle, aging, fat loss, I want to talk about some problems that people have, some speed bumps or road bumps, if you will. One of them is a lot of people, they eat clean, and despite them eating clean and working out, they still aren't losing body fat. What's typically going on there?
Yeah, thank you. That is not uncommon, actually, unfortunately. And when that occurs, I recommend that a person start looking at their toxic burden, because it turns out that toxins, those might be metal toxins like mercury, lead, cadmium, arsenic, um, or what are called persistent organic pollutants. These are long-lived chemicals that are in our environment. As we know, we put over 50,000 new chemicals in our environment over the last 50 years. And so those families of substances can be concentrated in the body in people that have been exposed, and they interrupt the flow of your calories of diet into flow of energy of your body. They actually are toxins that inhibit things like your mitochondrial bioenergetics, your ability of your cells to make energy. And there is actually quite a bit of work that's been done over the last 10 or 15 years, scientific studies showing that individuals who have been exposed and are concentrating these forms of toxins, these heavy metal toxins, it could be, say, mercury come from dental work, or it could be cadmium that comes from contaminated food products. Those then block the ability to produce energy, and when they are detoxified or eliminated from the body, an individual then starts to more effectively process the calories of energy from their diet and convert it into fat loss. And so This is where we would then start suggesting some kind of a detoxification dietary program. I've worked on this now for the last 40 years, so I think I can say this with some degree of assurity, having done studies on literally thousands of people over the years and published those studies, that the concept of dietary detoxification in people that have heavy metal or petrochemical toxicity can have a very dramatic effect both on things like their metabolic health, but also obviously on their weight. And you can start to see people break out of this resistance to weight loss to where they're starting to see weight loss occur much more rapidly.
And I think another speed bump roadblock that people run into is there's obviously been a lot of talk about muscle mass as it relates to fat loss and longevity and the importance of that. Is sometimes when people go on a diet, they don't realize that when they're switching to healthy foods typically, whole foods, have less calories than processed foods. And so they end up losing muscle mass along the way, which kind of in some ways defeats the process, right? So how can people make sure they're losing body fat without losing muscle?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's really important in whatever nutritional program a person uses uh, to improve their metabolic performance, that it be uh, adequate and rich in high quality protein that's rich in essential amino acids. And so you can lower calories and not lose body muscle if you eat the proper diet that's adequate in high quality protein and you get the right kind of exercise, a combination of strength and conditioning exercises and aerobic exercise kind of alternative. Those can both maintain and actually build muscle while you're losing weight. We've published studies on this over the years. Secondly, I think it's really important in that story of maintenance of muscle to recognize that our muscle mass is a storage of protein that our body can use for energy. So if we're not getting adequate replenishment, then what happens is the body starts scavenging our own muscle to produce more energy, because muscle protein can also be a source of energy, just as glucose from carbohydrate or fatty acids from fat can do so. So I think this is a combination of factors when we're wanting to build muscle and lose weight, increase our lean body mass by building aerobic potential and converting beige fat to brown fat. All of those happen as a consequence of the diet that we've been talking about, the right kind of lifestyle that puts all these things together. It's not just one shot on goal. It is a multifactorial approach that starts to turn around your what I call immunometabolism, the effects of your immune system on your metabolism and your metabolism on your immune system. Now, there's one last part of the story that is emerging that I think is important to point out, and this may not be well understood by most people. When you are losing muscle mass, in part, that can be a consequence of having chronic inflammation. Um, Chronic inflammation, the source of that is often derived from your gut microbiome. When your gut microbiome is disturbed, you have what's called dysbiosis. It can result in then a release into your blood of messenger molecules from your gut immune system that trigger muscle loss. These are inflammatory mediators called cytokines. And these particular substances that are released out of a toxic gut then can encourage muscle loss during any kind of program, but particularly during a weight loss program. So I think working on the gut to make sure you have proper gut microbiome integrity and health. That's why you want to use proper pre and probiotics. It's another reason I really like the tartary buckwheat story, because it's so rich in the right kind of prebiotics that help to stimulate a healthy gut microbiome. All of that becomes part then of lowering the inflammatory potential that causes muscle loss. And so I think a lot of people who are having problems with not with losing muscle while they're on a weight management program, they need to really make sure they're looking at their gut to make sure their microbiome is properly nourished.
So there's been talk over the years too about like hacks that people can do to rev up their metabolism and speed things up. Have you found um, that any certain style of eating or foods can actually help like speed up the metabolism to help with the fat loss process?
Well, we do certainly know that there are ways of stimulating the output of the adrenal cortical hormones, the stress hormones that, as I mentioned earlier, have influence on um, the way both fat and sugar is metabolized. And the classic example, of course, is caffeine. We know that caffeine has a, depending upon the level you consume, it's a little bit like aspirin. You have different effects at different levels of intake. So um, we know that I think anyone that's consume more coffee at a setting than they should know that their heart gets all kind of wonky. They can get premature ventricular contractions over stimulation of caffeine on their sympathetic nervous system. So we do know that caffeine plays a role, and there are substances like caffeine in other plant foods that, particularly tropical plants, those from the Amazonia, which have been shown to have this catechol-like effect that cause what I guess people have euphemistically called revving up your metabolism. My feeling about that is if you look in the long-term outcome and benefit, you might get a short-term positive, but you may have a long-term negative, and the long-term benefit has never been proven. So I think if you really want to rev metabolism, you want to really normalize metabolism using the things that I've been describing. That's going to get the long-term. You're going to win the race in the end by not depending upon short-term mimetics that basically alter synthetically your metabolism, but this long-term um, resetting of your metabolism so it's doing work for you 24/7.
Are there any myths you see out there regarding what we've been talking about that you think people need to stop believing in order to see results?
Well, I think the one myth is the myth that we have our genes are what cause us to gain weight, and that some people just got the luck of the draw with good genes for weight loss, and others got the genes that cause weight gain. And I think that model, although there is some truth to it, it's way overextended. It leads into people feeling that they have no abilities to make change, and so as a consequence, their lot in life is determined. Now, if we look at what we've learned from the GLP-1 agonist drugs, that's a really interesting story for us, I think, at this point in our discussion. So we know that Ozempic, Wegovy, and both facilitate weight loss. They do so by two ways, one of which is lowering appetite, and people that have been on these medications acknowledge that their hunger for food goes down. They also activate this brown fat metabolism that I was describing, our bioenergetics. So they have dual benefit. And then it begs the question, so suddenly these drugs have become available as if we just discovered that our body makes these hormones like glucagon, like peptide 1 or GIP, gastrointestinal peptide, or other kinds of compounds that are members of this family that regulate weight and appetite. But we've known about them for some period of time, and it turns out that those hormones are actually made by our intestinal tract in response to certain kinds of foods. And so we natively make natural GLP-1. It's a natural hormone in response to certain diets. And what are the foods in our diets that actually stimulate GLP-1? Well, it turns out that the activator for the release of GLP-1 in our intestinal tract are receptors that are identical in their composition to the receptors on our tongue called the bitter receptors. So the bitter receptors that are on our tongue that taste bitter are the same receptors that are embedded in our intestinal tract that stimulate the release of GLP-1. So if you eat a diet that contains what are generally going to be vegetable products, obviously, that have some of these substances that have a slight bitter taste, like there's a bitter melon that has been used in the Orient for years for managing blood sugar. It is a GLP-1 agonist. It causes the release naturally of GLP-1. I mentioned hops. Hops has a bitter flavor. It stimulates the release of GLP-1. Himalayan tartary buckwheat causes the release of GLP-1. So the bitter flavored foods in our diet, obviously vegetable products, have a very significant impact upon improving GLP-1 activity. Also, so do the friendly microbiome that comes from probiotics stimulate those GLP-1 release as well. So the point I'm really trying to say is that our body has built into it mechanisms that we can activate, we can access by the way that we eat that would mimic what we're relying upon in the way of drugs to try to improve weight management and blood sugar levels and energy production and muscle mass without relying upon pharmaceuticals.
What are your thoughts about like intermittent fasting and time restricted eating? Do you think the hype is real, or do you think that people, do you think it's been too overhyped and that people like need to focus on the basics, exercise, eating whole foods, managing sleep, stress, etc.?
I think time restricted eating is a very, very valuable tool that I personally use and advocate because it's easy to implement. You know, if you just train yourself not to eat after 7 p.m. and you don't have your next food until say 10 or 11 in the morning the next day, um, you can easily implement that fasting mimicking approach, and it has positive impacts on your immune system and on your metabolism. So if this becomes a person who says that is the only solution to the problem, that's overhyping. But if you say it as part of a historical way that we've eaten, that's why we called it breakfast, break fast, because historically people fasted for 12 hours before they ate. That's the way that the custom was. We didn't have all the luxurious abundance of things to eat that we have today. And so our native circadian rhythms are built around these time clocks that I think associate with time restricted eating.
And then if somebody is going to do some time restricted eating, what do you think is the most effective approach to do so?
Well, I think there's some debate about this, obviously, but I think if you can introduce something like the 12-12 program, that means you compress your eating into half of the day, 12 hours, and then you have 12 hours that you don't eat. So if you quit eating at 7 at night, that means you don't eat again until 7 in the morning. That's not that hard to do, actually. If unless you're eating late nights and you're getting snacks in the morning before you've got your 12 hours of in between. And the reason 12 hours is useful is that that's the time that your body generally depletes its glycogen reserves in the liver. It's a time where your body reestablishes a base metabolism from which you're going to build out through the day. It also is a time that your brain needs for getting rid of garbage through the lymphatics in your brain. So all these things happen on that kind of cycle that are associated with that duration of time.
And I think people get into fasting because they've said it like can help with like brain fog, right? It can help them with like mental clarity. What are your thoughts on brain fog? If somebody's feeling kind of foggy, they can't think straight, like what do you think's causing that, and what's the best way to kind of get out of it?
Yeah, yeah. So to me, the concept of brain fog or cognitive dysfunction or your mind seems to be slowing down, um, I would start talking about chronic inflammation in your brain. These concepts that are associated, as I said, with chronic inflammation. The brain has its own immune system. It's called the microglia. It communicates with the rest of the body. So if your body is under chronic inflammation because you have dysbiosis, you're eating an inflammatory diet, you're living an inflammatory lifestyle, you're smoking, you're drinking too much alcohol, you're under stress, then your brain picks that up, and its immune system in the brain is then in a pro-inflammatory state, and that's associated with these problems: sleep disturbances, cognitive dysfunction, memory loss, dysphoria, depression. So that's where I would start. I would start to think about the gut's connection to the immune system, connected to the brain, and get on a diet and lifestyle that puts them back in balance.
Well, Dr. Bland, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
It's been my pleasure, and I think you've done a really great job of helping to navigate across a lot of very important topics that people can apply in their lives. It really makes a difference.
Thank you. That really means a lot coming from you.
Thank you.